Hello, damsels and knights. I'm Sam Godwin, and welcome to the fourth episode of The Late History Show, the late show where we talk about history with the ones who made it. In the previous episode, we interviewed the first Norman king of England, and tonight we have the honor of having the last Tudor queen and one of the best rulers in English history, the OG Queen Elizabeth. A big applause for Elizabeth Tudor. Thanks, Your Majesty, for accepting our invitation.
It's a pleasure for me.
And it's an honor for us. First of all, how are you?
I'm good. The afterlife is a nice place to pass eternity. Sadly, I cannot say the same for my beloved country.
Yeah, sadly England is not living in a golden age, unlike your times.
It makes me sad and angry seeing the current state of England. Once, we were the rulers of the world. I worked hard to transform a kingdom into an empire. My reign was essential for the beginning of the process that will shape England from a European power into a world superpower. And look where we are now. You are Italian, so you know how it feels to live in a country with a glorious past and a decadent present.
Yeah, it's better to talk about the past. I took some questions from our public about some topics of your reign that I want to make you throughout the show. Here's the first one. Philip Thinking 98 asks, who was Elizabeth I, and why does she have an entire era named after her?
I was the ruler of England and Ireland from 1558 to 1603. I was so good at my job as a queen and as the supreme governor of the Church of England that they named a whole era after me. The so-called Elizabethan era, which is considered a golden age in English history. I laid the foundations for England's rise to world domination, unlike Elizabeth II, who saw the British power rapidly decline.
Now, before the next question about your reign, I would like you to tell us how you became queen, since you weren't supposed to rule England.
Well, it wasn't easy. When my father, Henry VIII, the famous king with constant marriage problems, died in 1547, my half-brother Edward VII became King of England. He was only 9 and his health wasn't good. He died in 1554, aged 15, without leaving a son. The kingdom passed to his eldest relative, my half-sister, the famous Protestant hater, Mary Tudor. I risked my life at the beginning of her reign. I was suspected of being part of a plot to overthrow her. Fortunately, I had many supporters who protected me and proved my innocence. Mary lasted only 4 years on the throne, fortunately for the Protestants. As she had no son and was married to the King of Spain, Felipe II. Since no one wanted him to have any possibility of power over England and I was next in line for the kingdom, I became queen in 1558. This was my journey to the throne of England, in a nutshell.
Time for the next question from our public. Tudor Enjoyer 88 asks, was Elizabeth Tudor a Protestant?
Well, yes and no. The Anglican Church is kinda in the middle between Catholic and Protestant. Let me explain. My father Henry considered himself a Catholic, but he didn't want to be under the rules of the Pope. So he declared that the Church of England would now be independent from the papacy and the ruler of all the English churches was now the king. After this decision, the ideas of Protestantism started to be spread throughout the kingdom. All this was reversed under the reign of my half-sister Mary, who was a little too Catholic and had a problem with the Protestants.
What kind of problem?
That kind of problem that caused a lot of people to die. You see, in the past when a ruler had some problems with a certain group of people, we usually went straight forward to the use of violence. Especially in religious matters. Back to us, when I became queen there were tensions between Catholics and Protestants, but I decided to follow the path of my fathers. The Act of Supremacy of 1558 restored the Church of England's independence from Rome. Parliament gave me the epic title of Supreme Governor of the Church of England. All public officials were required to swear an oath of loyalty to the monarch as Supreme Governor of the Church. Discussions between Catholics and Protestants continued nonetheless, but at least they could practice their faith with a fair degree of freedom.
Now we have a question about an important event in English and Spanish history. Francis the Chad Drake 96 asks, why was the defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588 so important?
That time we showed those Spaniards who was the real king of the seas. Good times. In 1588, tensions between England and Spain were very high. So much so that the King of Spain, Felipe II von Habsburg, prepared a fleet and ordered an invasion of our lands. Luckily for us, God was on our side and the fleet was defeated by our navy, and the invasion was a failure for Spain and a great victory for us. We didn't know it at the time, but this defeat would be a turning point. From that moment on, we began a journey that will make us the undisputed global naval and colonial superpower in the span of 2 centuries. From that day, they began to decline, we began to rise.
What about the fact that you also tried to invade them with a large fleet and failed to strike a decisive blow? Twice. Your propaganda about this victory was so great that people forgot that you tried to do the same thing and failed.
This is why propaganda is important for a ruler. It makes people forget your mistakes and remember only what you want. History is written by the victors.
Well, yes and no. It depends on the time period. In your case, I don't think so. But let's talk about something more interesting and peaceful than war. Culture. During your reign, England saw the height of the English Renaissance.
Yeah, during my lifetime, literature and art continued to flourish all over England. I was a well-educated ruler, so I understood the importance of supporting culture. To be clear, the English Renaissance is different from the Italian one, which everyone thinks about it. The art forms that flourished the most were literature and music, as opposed to the Italians' incredible production of paintings and sculptures. It also started much later than the Italian one.
Basically, our Renaissance masters were more focused on painting, making sculptures and architecture like Michelangelo, and yours more on composing pieces of music and literature, like Shakespeare. Speaking of the famous writer, did he really existed? You know, there are some speculations and theories which claim that he never existed and his works were made by someone else.
You know, he is still a little frustrated when he hears about these theories. Yes, William Shakespeare existed and he was an interesting person and a very talented writer. I think that his works speaks for themselves.
Absolutely. Now, I would like to mention another aspect of your reign that will eventually have a great impact on England: the race to colonize America.
This will be one of my most important achievements that will have a great impact for my successors. During my reign, the explorer Sir Walter Raleigh and his crew reached this new land called America to found the first English colony. They also came back home, which, believe me, was not so obvious for someone who traveled across the ocean to come back alive. In 1585, he reached the shores of North America and founded the colony of Virginia, named after me, his Virgin Queen. Also, the first village in North America was settled by him. Kind of, considering it was Roanoke, which didn't lasted very long. These were small steps in comparison to the other nations, but with time, these steps will be crucial for our domination of the seas later on.
Speaking of the seas, we must not forget a figure who is often associated with your reign and who also played an important part in making England stronger: Francis Drake.
Sir Francis Drake. That mad lad deserved to be knighted after surviving the circumnavigation of the world. He and his crew were the first English to sail around all the continents between 1577 and 1580. They also came back alive, which again it's an achievement on his own. Apart from this incredible adventure, he was also a great corsair under our flag. He captured a lot of Spanish ships and damaged Spanish ports both in the Caribbean and in the Iberian Peninsula, bringing home Spanish gold, which we really appreciated. You should invite him on the show. The man had a life that deserves to be told.
Why not? Francis is considered an important figure both in the history of piracy and in the history of exploration. We could consider this option. Now it is time for our last big question from our audience. Why Elizabeth Tudor never married? You are called the Virgin Queen because you never married and presumably you were a true virgin. Now I don't really care if you ever had sex or not.
And I would not answer such a question. Some things should remain a secret.
But the fact that you have never married is very curious, and many people would like to know the reason for this decision.
Well, it wasn't something that I decided on one particular day for one particular reason. It was a thing that came about year by year. If it were up to me, I would have married a nobleman called Robert Dudley, a longtime friend and who will be later a statesman. But many of my advisors and a section of the public didn't want this marriage to happen and they stopped it. Despite this, I continued to feel some important feelings for him for the rest of my life. You should also remember that in a nation divided between Catholics and Protestants, you couldn't just take a random noble and make him King of England. Every option had someone who opposed it. The years went by and I understood an important thing. I liked power. Being queen without a king meant all the power was mine. I didn't like the idea of sharing it or even losing it to my possible husband. Also, I should have a child, and dying in childbirth was something not so rare in my times. Or even worse, I could have shared the same faith of my mother, Anne Boleyn.
Which faith?
Beheaded because she couldn't produce a male heir. This mixture of reasons persuaded me to never marry until my death. Of course, my court wasn't very enthusiastic about this idea, but by the 1580s they accepted my will. Sort of.
I think your reasons are understandable. Before we finish our interview, I was curious about one thing: your knowledge of languages. Most of the rulers spoke one or two languages, but you spoke many more.
Yes, I had a good education in my youth, where I learned a lot of things, including languages. I find them interesting, as well as being important, since we had relationships with many nations across Europe. I spoke 7 languages: Welsh, Cornish, Scottish, Irish, Latin, French, and even Italian. I also knew a little bit of Greek.
It's so weird for me to know that an English ruler learned and spoke Italian.
In my times, Italy was still relevant and worth to study its language for a foreign king. Unlike today.
Sadly, you are right. This was the final question. We arrived at the end of this episode. Thanks for your participation, Your Majesty.
It was a pleasure. I hope to come back one day.
Thanks for your time, damsels and knights. If you enjoyed the content, don't forget to subscribe, and see you in the next video.